Somewhere north of 150 scripted series aired across the major American networks in 1994, and most of them you can name without thinking too hard. Friends, ER, Seinfeld, Frasier, the shows that collected the box sets and the reunion specials and 30 years of cultural mythology. But for every one of those, there were a dozen others that launched with genuine ambition, real money behind them, and actual talent attached, only to disappear before anyone had time to mourn them. No finale, no farewell season, no explanation offered. We're talking about shows built around the first black live-action superhero in American television history, a network that canceled its own show and then canceled it again on a different network, and a Western that accidentally handed its Friday night time slot to one of the most successful series the decade produced. If you think 1994 was purely the year of the coffee shop couch and how you doing, the shows nobody remembers are always the ones worth examining most closely. This is the one that genuinely deserved better, and the gap between what it was supposed to be and what it became tells you a lot about how network television worked in 1994. On August 26th of that year, Fox aired M.A.N.T.I.S, which stood for Mechanically Augmented Neurotransmitter Interception System, and which starred Carl Lumbly as Dr. Miles Hawkins, a wealthy scientist paralyzed during a riot who builds a powered exosuit to walk again and fight crime. That made him arguably the first live-action black superhero to lead an American television series. Not a sidekick, not a supporting character, but the lead, and that was years before Black Lightning and years before Blade. The series arrived to claim that territory. The creative pedigree behind the original pilot was serious. Sam Raimi produced it. The same Sam Raimi who would later direct the Spider-Man trilogy, and Sam Hamm developed it, the screenwriter responsible for Tim Burton's 1989 Batman. What they built together dealt extensively with race and inequality, with the pilot hinting at a systemic conspiracy specifically targeting the black community as the overarching seasonal arc. That was ambitious for network television in 1994, and Fox knew it, which is probably why they stripped almost all of it out when they ordered the series. The entire supporting cast was recast for the weekly show, leaving Lumbly as the sole survivor from the pilot, and the racial themes largely evaporated along with the original ensemble. Halfway through the season, low ratings triggered another round of retooling, this time steering the show toward monster of the week plots, parallel universes, and time travel storylines. Lumbly later described the creative shift as the team moving too far from what Hamm and Raimi had originally written, which is a remarkably measured way of characterizing what happened to the show he was carrying. What I find most striking is the finale situation. Fox canceled M.A.N.T.I.S before airing its last 2 episodes, which eventually surfaced on the Sci-Fi channel in September 1997, 3 years after the fact. 2 episodes quietly deposited on cable television, with no announcement and no audience. That's not a cancellation so much as a slow erasure, and a show that could have been something genuinely historic deserved a cleaner ending than that. 19 episodes. ABC aired exactly 19 episodes of My So-Called Life between August 25th, 1994 and January 26th, 1995, and in the 3 decades since, it has generated more cultural writing, more emotional retrospectives, and more genuine ongoing devotion than shows that ran for 10 seasons and went out with stadium-filling farewell coverage. Created by Ed Zwick and Marshall Herskovitz, the series starred Claire Danes as Angela Chase, a 15-year-old navigating high school with a specificity and emotional honesty that felt genuinely unusual for network television at the time. Jared Leto played Jordan Catalano, her complicated teenage crush, and the show also featured what was then the first openly gay teenager on American network television, which was not a small thing in 1994. The time slot killed it. ABC placed My So-Called Life directly opposite Friends and Mad About You on Thursday nights, which meant it was competing against the most dominant programming block NBC had assembled in years, and the ratings never reached what the network required to justify renewal. You'd think a show receiving this level of critical acclaim would survive on reputation alone, but 1994 NBC Thursday nights were essentially impenetrable, and no amount of praise from television critics translates into an automatic audience. Here's the detail that tends to get buried in the cancellation story. The online petition organized to save the show was reportedly the first internet petition of its kind for a television series. Launched in 1995 when the internet itself was still a novelty most households hadn't encountered. People were mobilizing on early digital networks to fight for a show they loved, and the network walked away regardless. Zwick addressed the cancellation directly in his book, and his explanation distills to something simple. It was ahead of its time. The brutal irony is that being ahead of its time was precisely why it vanished, and also precisely why it never really went away. Some shows get canceled once, and that's the end of it. The Critic managed to get canceled by 2 separate networks in back-to-back years, which is an unusual enough achievement that it deserves to be stated plainly before anything else. Created by Mike Reiss and Al Jean, 2 former Simpsons showrunners who understood animated comedy, as well as anyone working in television, the series premiered on ABC on January 26, 1994, with John Lovitz voicing Jay Sherman, a pompous and self-regarding New York film critic whose signature line, "It stinks," became the show's calling card. ABC canceled it after 1 season, at which point Fox picked it up specifically to pair it with The Simpsons, a strategy that sounds foolproof on paper. The Critic ran for 23 total episodes across both networks before Fox canceled it as well, and a sharp, genuinely funny piece of Hollywood satire quietly ceased to exist by 1995. You'd think a show built on parodying movies written by Simpsons alumni, airing in the same block as The Simpsons, would find its footing, but Fox already had what they needed from that pairing. And the moment the Critic's numbers wobbled, there was no institutional energy to defend it. The animated film parodies embedded throughout each episode were clever in a way that held up. The Hollywood satire had actual teeth, and Lovitz was perfectly cast as a character built from equal parts pomposity and genuine vulnerability. 2 networks looked at that combination and passed on it. That's the television business operating exactly as it usually does, which is to say not always wisely. This one sits at the precise intersection of automotive culture and television history, which makes it exactly the kind of story worth spending time on. Viper debuted on NBC on January 2, 1994, built around a federal task force that uses a modified 1994 Flame Red Dodge Viper RT/10 Roadster, capable of transforming into a fully armored assault vehicle called the Defender, to pursue and apprehend criminals. The premise was essentially a love letter to the car itself, and the car earned that attention. Dodge had launched the Viper RT10 Roadster in 1992 as an unapologetic American performance statement, and the RT10 packed an 8.0-liter V10 engine producing 400 horsepower and 465 pound-feet of torque, with no traction control and no airbags in early production models. It was the kind of machine that demanded full attention from the moment you touched the throttle, and placing the 1994 Dodge Viper RT10 Roadster at the center of a weekly action series made commercial and creative sense in equal measure. What's less commonly known is that the Viper Defender transformation vehicle wasn't built by a Hollywood custom shop operating on a production budget, but by Chrysler Corporation engineers working directly on the project, which was genuinely unusual for the era. The story behind how the show even made it to air is stranger than the plot of any episode. Stephen J. Cannell was simultaneously developing a competing series also titled Viper. Chrysler sued to protect their brand association, and Cannell's show was renamed Cobra as a result. CBS, which had originally been attached to air the series, then decided it was too violent and walked away entirely, and only Chrysler's continued financial investment in the promotional value kept the production alive long enough for NBC to pick it up. The show exists because a car company filed a lawsuit. NBC canceled Viper in April 1994 after 1 season, though the series was later revived for first-run syndication and ran for 3 additional seasons, which is a better outcome than most canceled shows ever manage. The cobalt blue metallic finish applied to the Dodge Viper GTS used in the 4th season was developed exclusively for the production and never offered to the public as a standard color option. The complete series eventually received a DVD release in late 2017, which is a long wait for a show built around one of the most visually arresting cars Dodge ever produced. NBC launched Earth 2 on November 6, 1994, with what appeared to be genuine long-term commitment to ambitious science fiction television, and the show opened to solid numbers that suggested the network's confidence wasn't entirely misplaced. The premise put colonists on a distant alien planet following a crash landing, and the survival drama that followed dealt with ecological balance, family breakdown under pressure, and the difficulty of building community from scratch in a genuinely hostile environment. Deborah Ferrantino and Clancy Brown led the cast, with Rebecca Gayheart and Jessica Steen in supporting roles. And the creative team behind it included writers Billy Ray, Michael Dugan, Carol Flint, and Mark Levin working under Ambrose Bierce Productions and Universal Television. The ratings declined steadily across the show's 22-episode run, and the timing couldn't have been less helpful because The X-Files had launched on Fox that same autumn and was demonstrating that genre television could work at a network level. Everything that wasn't The X-Files suddenly looked like a problem to be managed rather than an opportunity to be developed. Earth 2 was canceled after one season, with no resolution to its storylines and no proper send-off for a cast and crew who had built something with genuine ambition. A devoted audience found the show after the fact, drawn to exactly the qualities that made it difficult to sustain in a competitive Friday night slot. They just found it too late to help. There's a footnote attached to this cancellation that most people have never connected, and once you see it, the irony is pretty hard to ignore. The Adventures of Brisco County Jr. aired on Fox from August 27, 1993 through May 20, 1994, with Bruce Campbell starring as a bounty hunter operating in a Western setting that folded in science fiction elements and sharp comedic writing throughout its 27-episode run. Created by Jeffrey Boehm and Carlton Cuse, the show received strong critical notices and built a loyal audience, neither of which was enough to save it. The Western genre wasn't drawing network audiences in 1994, and the only real evidence that it could work commercially was Clint Eastwood's Unforgiven from 1992, which was a film and not a template for weekly television. Fox canceled Brisco County at the end of the season, and the Friday night slot it had occupied was handed directly to The X-Files the same week, May 1994. The most successful genre series of the decade stepped into the exact space vacated by a show that deserved a longer run, and the schedule swap happened so cleanly it barely registered at the time. Warner Brothers released Brisco County on DVD in 2006, and Campbell has remained a consistent advocate for the show's legacy in the years since. What it deserved was 5 seasons and a proper conclusion, and what it got was a cult following and a footnote in X-Files history. MTV's first scripted science fiction series launched on June 16, 1994, and disappeared after 13 episodes without much noise in either direction. Dead at 21 starred Jack Noseworthy as a young man who discovers that the government implanted experimental microchips in his brain as an infant, designed to accelerate intelligence, but programmed to trigger fatal neurological failure by the time he reached 21, sending him on the run alongside co-stars Lisa Dean Ryan and Whip Hubley while searching for a way out. The concept was genuinely interesting, and the fact that MTV was producing original scripted science fiction in 1994 at all was worth paying attention to. You'd think a network built entirely around youth culture would find a natural audience for a show centered on a 21-year-old in a government conspiracy, but the ratings didn't materialize, and the series ended without ceremony. Created by John Sherman, Dead at 21 is now extraordinarily difficult to locate, with no confirmed streaming availability and no DVD release to speak of, which means it survives almost entirely in the memory of people who happened to catch it on a Thursday night in the summer of 1994 and noticed something strange and interesting that nobody around them seemed to be watching. 25 episodes across 4 seasons on MTV between 1994 and 1995, which sounds like a reasonable run until you consider how compressed those seasons were and how abruptly the whole enterprise ended. The state grew out of a New York sketch comedy group of the same name, and the cast it assembled reads now like a directory of comedy talent that would go on to define the following 2 decades. Thomas Lennon, Ben Garant, Ken Marino, Kerry Kenny Silver, Michael Ian Black, David Wayne, Joe Lo Truglio, and Michael Showalter. The group that produced The State would later create Reno 911, Wet Hot American Summer, and Stella, which puts the show's cancellation in a particular light. The end came partly from a deliberate choice, because the cast reportedly turned down the option to move the series to CBS, which would have meant a larger platform and a significantly bigger budget. They walked away from that, the show ended, and the careers that followed suggest the decision served them individually, even if it meant the state itself evaporated. What compounds the frustration is the rights situation that followed, because licensing disputes kept the show off home video and streaming for years afterward, meaning a series made by people who became genuinely successful couldn't even trade on their later reputation to reach new viewers. For a show this consistently funny, built by this much concentrated talent, that's a genuinely SET outcome. And it took far longer than it should have for the rights situation to be resolved and the show to reach the audience it always deserved. The pattern running through all of these shows is obvious once you lay them side by side. Every single one ran into the same wall. A 1994 television landscape so thoroughly dominated by a handful of franchise hits that almost no oxygen remained for anything adventurous or unusual. Networks would greenlight ambitious, expensive, genuinely interesting projects, place them in brutal time slots against immovable competition, and pull the plug the moment the numbers didn't arrive immediately. The X-Files worked, and everything else that tried to build something strange and complicated had roughly 1 season to make its case before the conversation ended. My read on it is this: The 1994 television graveyard contains at least 3 or 4 shows that, produced today under streaming economics with the patience those platforms actually extend to genre and prestige content, would have run for 5 seasons, generated substantial merchandise revenue, and spawned the kind of documentary retrospectives that fill out a channel's anniversary programming slate. The talent was present. The ideas were there. The business model simply wasn't constructed to support them, and a generation of genuinely ambitious television paid the price for that mismatch. The real cost wasn't the cancellations. It was everything those shows could have become with one more season and a network that believed in them. The history of what almost made it in Hollywood is the history that actually explains how the industry operates, and there's a lot more of it sitting in the archives waiting to be examined, which is exactly what this channel keeps coming back to dig into.